I can't spend my existence feeling guilty, right, about saying no to family and friends when it comes to money, because I truly believe the only person I'm responsible for is me, right? So if you're listening, the only person responsible for you is you. If your family or your friends ask for a loan, just remember your future self and use that to negotiate a no. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. However, I think families of color, especially Black families, tend to lean on the successful person too soon.
What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit in that? We tackle those questions and others in the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We talk about the role of money in our personal growth and spiritual liberation, the concrete math of budgeting and saving and investing, and how all this relates to the life you were meant to lead. Each episode is an interview with a former student of my online course, Financial Freedom 1, where they explain their favorite lesson and years later, what financial, behavioral, and spiritual impact it had on them. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of School of Financial Freedom, and your host. Glad you're here. I'm excited to introduce you to Jessie Dunley Jr. today because we're going to talk about lesson 2.3, which is about poverty, race, status, and conspicuous consumption. The intersection of race and status and consumption is a pretty delicate and sensitive topic, and Jessie's going to talk about what it means to grow up Black in America and what does it mean to live in a family that doesn't have intergenerational wealth and what does it mean to build it. This is a really special lesson for me here. I think Jessie talks a lot about stuff that we don't really want to acknowledge, that one, the playing field is not open, and two, it's still possible.
Hi, I'm Jessie Dunley Jr., and this is the School of Financial Freedom podcast.
Jessie, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jessie. I am from Texas. Grew up in a single parent household raised by a lot of, women. I had my mother, my great grandmother, some cousins grew up who, just grew up down the street from us, and we had access to them. And so I'm part of the village. One of the greatest things our mom did for us was allow us to have access to these wonderful human beings who helped us, me and my three brothers, grow up into just great people. And she did a lot of good things, right? And so from her, we learned how to work hard and have dignity in our work. But we also learned some incredibly bad habits from her, stuff that we all carried into adulthood. And so the School of Financial Freedom really helped me unlearn some of those bad habits. First of all, it made me realize that I could change, my thinking, right? Thoughts, actions, and beliefs into becoming just a different human being.
Well, that's already inspiring, Jessie. You chose the lesson 2.3, which is about poverty, race, status, and conspicuous consumption. Why did you choose this lesson?
Well, it really, growing up in a town where most of the people are Black or African American and are really close to whatever is defined as the poverty line, it really spoke to me. I remember being in high school, reading a lesson in my junior history class about consumption and how people put on masks or buy costumes in order to show people that they're not poor. And it really, and this lesson really spoke to that moment. And it was just a genesis of, a bunch of thoughts that just came flowing out as I did the lesson.
Yeah, the intersection of race and wealth in America is particularly important to me, and how they intersect with each other is the topic of this lesson. Why don't we go into the lesson and you can explain it?
Can you say that again? What was my what?
Why don't we go into the lesson and so you can explain it?
Okay, that sounds great. Where do you want to start?
Well, we'll start with the basic idea that, whether it's explicit or implicit, America treats Black people differently than white people.
Oh, wow. I mean, there are a bunch of research out there that say, that proves that Black folk are in the bottom rung of the ladder. Our wealth is a lot different, significantly less than white folks' wealth. In terms of getting mortgages, it's really harder for us to get access to to those generational wealth opportunities. The playing field, in my opinion, is uneven. I think it is really important for us to acknowledge that your race is a factor, whether you like it or not, in terms of your upward economic mobility.
Yeah, and to me, it's not only the historical legacy of racism, but it's how people treat each other today, right? Like if you were a Black person, you will be treated differently today. Forget about what happened in the past, right? Like it's harder to get housing, it's harder to get a job, healthcare is worse. And so it's not only the legacy of wealth and privilege that has happened because white people have been able to build wealth in the past, but it's just more difficult as a Black person economically today.
That's right. And you have to do all of the things, right, that other people don't need to do. You have assimilation comes into play, right? Being able to code switch comes into play, right? Being able to I grew up in a city where you were taught in order to succeed or be successful, you need to be twice as good as the person next to you, right? And internalizing those thoughts, you always think that, hey, I think for me that you're not good enough. And so you just have to keep working hard to appear good enough. And part of those appearances is meaning spending outside of your means, buying clothes that you don't necessarily want to buy, speaking in a way that people in your community might think that's inauthentic, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole you have to be twice as good. I have a friend who works at Nike, and she mentioned once that like she noticed that her Black colleagues were literally twice as good as everyone else, and her big realization was, oh, that meant the rest of us actually only have to work half as hard to get the same thing. Talk about this idea of conspicuous consumption and the need for Black people to actually look like they're wealthier than they are.
Yeah, so I think for me, it all started as a child, right? Making sure that your clothes are clean, well pressed, ironed, because you don't want to be lumped with the other. And I think I took that lesson and I just like ran with it. So if we can talk about, I think the article about the logic of stupid poor people. My
Yes, yes.
first my first instinct would be, can we not use that title? I respect it, but I would change the stupid part to ignorant, right? Or
Well, I mean, the articles from Tressie McMillan Cottom, who actually won a MacArthur Award afterwards, but she's being intentionally provocative.
yeah, sure, yeah. No, no, I get it, I get it. I just needed to say that out, to
Okay,
say that out,
yeah,
to
sure.
say that out, to say that out loud, right? I think for me, poor Black people spend money to appear wealthier so they won't be lumped with other poor Black people because some, right, the people in charge, right, think that being poor means or equates with an inadequate education, right? The name brand goods poor people wear, right? Whatever the label is at that time, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2020, is to appeal to the gatekeepers, right? And so they won't have to think if this person is good enough. So it makes a lot of sense now. You look at any of the fashion, right? The labels are clearly printed
Mm,
to show folk, hey, I have the means to afford all of the things, including a great education. So don't lump me with that. Or I have the means and I'm not gonna come ask you for any of your stuff because my label shows that I have the means, right? And so for Black people, I think spend money to make other poor Black people to think that they're not poor, right? But all we have to do is go look at the research, the data, the city where you live in, and that's going to tell you what your average income is. It's going to give you an idea of how poor or rich you are. So it's a facade, right? For me, Yeah, I think I'm going to stop right there, just in case you wanted to respond to anything I said.
Well, it's an important facade, right? Like it's not only a facade for other Black people, but it's a facade for society in general, right? Like you have to wear a mask that protects you.
Right, but I guess my question, that I wanted to explore as I was looking at the lesson is dig deeper into figuring out like why we wear that mask, right?
Well, if I may, I remember you telling me a story once of like, when you graduated out of college, you had a crappy car and you got stopped by the police, which is a super, I don't want to swear, it was a super dangerous thing, right? And and I also had, Asian American, had a super crappy car. I never got stopped. And, I look back now at, given everything that's happened that I'm now aware of in the news, how scary that must have been for you, right?
It was different, I'm moving to a new part of the country, right? I have it was my baby, even though it was crappy. It was, my car. And I'm just trying to get to learn what it means to like be an adult, graduating from college, and I'm exploring the city, and all of a sudden I hear the sirens, I see the bright lights, and I'm on the side of the road, remembering, to be as polite as possible, and saying, hey, I'm new to the community. I just got here maybe like a few weeks ago. Why are you pulling me over? I know my tags are not expired. And the first question the officer asked me is, what are you doing here? I think I answered his question and my introduction as I was pulled over, right? But that's still it. And that didn't change, right? Because weeks later, I was pulled over again, and then the third time I was pulled over, I knew exactly what to say, and got out of it. And all of that changed once I updated my car to the latest model that people were driving in my community, right? It was forced. It was forced assimilation.
It's a super frightening story. And I think most people, if they're not Black, don't really understand that because they don't have the experience, right? And if you don't know, you don't know. And I know there's a lot of dialogue in the fire community, like, oh, if you're poor, like, why are you buying an expensive car, right? Like, that's such a illogical, stupid financial decision. And you're explaining this is actually it's actually a really smart decision. I mean, forget about the finances. Like, no one's caring about finances when their physical safety with the police
Yeah,
is.
that's what I was gonna say. I mean, to stay safe, to be able to come and go as other people are, right, or have been doing. And I love how you opened the episode because you talked about the intersection, right? And I strongly believe in intersectionality. And I think my plight is not just the plight of Black people, right? It's the it's the plight of the like Black and brown folk, right? So sure, I'm giving these anecdotes as a Black person, but these stories are no different from brown people who are listening as well, right? For other marginalized communities who are listening as well. I think, I remember working my job and having to really change how I even dressed. And I don't think I even dressed in a particular like style. I just knew that I would get more respect, right? People would think of me differently, right? If I wore a shirt and tie and slacks. And I didn't think that I could afford, not in the financial sense, right? But in the other definition of afford, I don't think I could afford to dress like some of my other colleagues were dressing. Like I couldn't wear the t-shirts. I didn't feel like I didn't feel like it was a community where I could wear flip flops and not be questioned about like my intent.
Yeah, yeah. I've had other Black colleagues tell me that they dress as well as they can because they can't actually dress like schlubby like their white colleagues can, or more accurately, their white male colleagues can.
That's right.
I remember, I used to be a lawyer, and I used to wear vintage suits, right, like old suits, just because I had to wear a suit, and well, maybe that's part of the reason I got fired. But I remember my Black colleagues; they wore the nicest suits they could.
Right. And, it goes back to the article about a relative having to dress up to basically save their neighbor, right? Because the neighbor wasn't wearing or didn't know to do the right things. And being able to put on that mask gives you access. And for me, I was just craving for access because in craving and attaining access, then you don't go back to that community where everybody is trying to make it, but there are people who don't really know how to make it out of the situation. So, I mean, that was the purpose of even entertaining financial freedom, whatever that looks like. There are various levels of it, and I learned through this lesson that it's really okay. Number one, the problems that you're having right now with your family are more than likely the problems you will continue to have, right? For as long as you are alive. And money doesn't solve everything, right? And so I had, as a result of this course, I had to learn how to be okay with saying no. I think once I was able to make a little bit more money, I felt this sense of gratitude to the people in my village who helped me get to this point. And I also felt a sense of duty to repay them. And I thought that the way I needed to repay them was by giving them money. And I think I knew that. And when I started to say no, it took a little bit of an adjustment period for them to be okay with that. And then I was recently reminded of it when, my sibling had passed away. And we were I was talking to my other siblings about our next steps. We were just reminiscing about how far we've come. And, my sibling said to me, we used to call you the Bank of Jessie when you graduated. I was like, what? I was like, tell me more. Well, we knew that you would always help us. And when we needed you. So we just decided to, hey, let's go ahead and give the Bank of Jessie a call because we know that we knew that you were gonna get us out of that.
How did it feel to hear that?
Awful, because it meant that it made me responsible for solving their problems, right? And it meant that I wasn't doing my part to teach them how to get out of it, right? To stop whatever behaviors that led them to that situation, right? And those were the same behaviors that I had, the overspending, right? Having the idea of your future self, but not actually remembering it constantly, the dependence on family members to get you out of a jam. And I opened, our discussion by talking about our mom and how she was a single parent, right? And how she taught us all of these great behaviors. But that was one of the things that she did. This was somebody who was paid every other week. She had enough money to get through the first week, right? But then struggled, at the beginning of the second week and had to borrow from family and friends to make ends meet. And I think that's something that, we inherited, as we were growing up. And so it made sense that they felt quite comfortable with turning to the Bank of Jessie, right? Because our mom did the same thing with the Bank of Family, and she just went to different branches, and those branches being other family members. And so that was something that I was interested. It was hurtful to hear, but to know that I was no longer in the position where they felt like they can call me for money also it made me feel better about it. That was that past that had happened, 10 to 15 years ago.
There's so much there. I imagine that when you were asked for money those years ago, you felt an obligation or did you feel guilt to give them money?
I think, I think at the beginning I felt an obligation because I didn't make it out of Texas by myself. These were people who sacrificed, and who had, in some cases, given me their last of what they had for me to get out of Texas. So there was a duty, right? But I also think that that duty to give has an expiration date.
Mm. It was almost like you were the golden ticket,
Yes,
and they invested in you early, and on some level, there was a return that they expected.
that's right. Yeah, and as I said earlier, I felt honored to do it because in some cases that, there were other men in our family who did the same thing. So it was like contributing to that. I remember when my great grandmother passed away, and she thought she had enough life insurance, for her final expenses and burial, and she didn't because her policy was paid up, in the 70s. She died 30 years later, right? And so she didn't have enough. And so, we passed the hats, so to speak. And I was honored to give my piece, right? To be able to contribute and to help honor this woman who had given so much to us, right? And then we kept doing it for different family members to a point where I just set my grandmother down and I said, if you don't have a policy today, you will have one tomorrow because we will not be doing this anymore. And I made her, we switched the relationship. I just made her show me her insurance papers. She ensured that I was her, we got her a power of attorney. I was the power of attorney. I was in charge of all of her final stuff. So when it was time for us to say goodbye to her, it hurt a lot. But knowing that we had those financial pieces in place made things a lot easier.
Brings up to me this idea of personal finance is really your relationship to the future. Well, I think about the famous Stanford study, the mushroom experiment, right, where they put these mushrooms in front of little kids and uh, tell the kids, if you can hold off for, I don't know, 5 minutes, we'll come back and we'll give you a second marshmallow, the marshmallow test. And what they find out is kids who are able to hold out for those 5 minutes, years later, are able to, they just have better outcomes. They're wealthier, they're more highly educated, they have lower body mass indexes. And so there's this whole idea that if you can teach your kids very early on to delay gratification, they're going to be wealthier. And a lot of that is the foundation of personal finance. What they discovered afterwards, they realized afterwards, is that they only tested Stanford's in Palo Alto, so they tested high income white kids. And when they did this study with kids of all income levels and diverse backgrounds, they discovered poorer kids ate the marshmallow much faster. Like they didn't want to wait for the 5 minutes. They just ate the marshmallow immediately. And one of the primary beliefs behind that second study is that when you grow up with less, you don't know if the future is coming. And you always take what you can immediately because you don't know if in 5 minutes, you don't even trust the person who's saying that, oh, I'm coming back in 5 minutes with another marshmallow.
I mean, I've seen the marshmallow experiment as well. It's interesting how you parse it out, right? I love how you say that it's for those who have a lot. It's easy for them to delay gratification because they will always have a lot, right? So how do you teach? How do you train? How do you remind somebody who doesn't have a lot that a lot is coming, right? And I think what has helped me navigate the latter part is the idea of some sort of gratification, right? The whole idea of paying yourself first, whatever that means. I would say pay yourself twice, right? I would say the paying yourself first is, whatever type of, retirement account that you have, make sure that you take that out of your check before you even see it. I had a colleague who we were discussing personal finance before personal finance was a thing, the thing, right? Who had been working at my place of employment for like 30 years, and has said, we discussed how much I was putting into my retirement account. And he said, put more in, you won't miss it. And that really helped. And I could not believe that. So for me, I will give my family credit. They were great about saving for a rainy day, like fantastic about it. But then they had the schizophrenic side to them where you would go into the house and you would see 30,000 items purchased from J.C. Penney because it was 90% off, right? And like, how do you reconcile those like two types of behaviors, right? You're saving for your eventual like demise or retirement, but then your house looks like an episode of Hoarders. Like, how do you do that? And it's because these are folks who grew up in a situation where they had not less, they had the least. And so having those things around your place ends up being your security blanket.
Shoot. Have you seen Silicon Valley, the TV show?
No, I have not.
Oh, shoot. There's this Asian American comedian on it, and talks in this episode or on his stand-up special on Netflix that Black people, they'll when they get something, they tell them, "Oh, this costs so much. This car costs $60,000."
I've seen that.
Right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
then the white people will never talk about like the car. They're like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, it cost a pretty penny," but they'll never tell you.
They never tell you how many
Right?
pennies it costs, right?
Yeah, and then he talks about Asian people, right? And Asian people will always tell you how cheap they got something, right?
That's
Like,
exactly right.
look at this thing. I got it on sale, right? And they tell you how much they got it for. It's so funny because, I came from an immigrant family. So, we have parallel ideas here. Whenever I would like go and eat with my family, like my mom and her sister, my aunt, would always be like, "Oh, pretty good vegetables, right? On sale, $2 a pound," right? Like,
That's right.
this pork, yeah, we got it at the store, $3 a pound. Cheap, huh? And good, huh?
That's right. And so that's what was happening in my family, like all those different types of behaviors, right? So you would, go to Penny's, right? Just because JC Penney was the store, and you would buy all of these things with your coupons and say how this was, buy one get 12 free, right? Oh, look at the 12 free that on average, I saved a lot of money. But then you would be outside, you would go outside and jump in your Cadillac Escalade. How do you reconcile those, right? So no, I get it 100%. And the marshmallow experiment took me back to that, right? And I think that's why I think I like this lesson, because it reaffirmed that I was on the right track, because I started saving as soon as I started working, right? Instantly, at my and at my place of employment. I was 22 when I started. They didn't match my contributions until I was 27, right? And so but I was already ahead of the curve in terms of the idea of your future self. I just didn't know what it was called. And this lesson helped put a name to a behavior, right? But, because I am a product of my environment, I still had to think about what it meant to like spend, what it meant to be a savior, what it meant to be better about personal finance.
Yeah, to me, it occurs all we're talking about is this idea, like no one can predict the future, right? But what we're talking about is perceived scarcity. This idea that, if you're poor or you're an immigrant and, my parents or grandparents, they fled the communists and lost everything, right? There's this sense you don't know how secure the future is. And I think if you grow up in relative privilege and entitlement, you're pretty confident the future is going to be relatively safe. And I don't, if you grow up in poverty, you grow up as an immigrant or, losing everything, that deep down sense that everything is okay or is going to be okay is not there.
Yeah, that's right. And then you're surprised, like I was, when you leave your home and then you meet people who don't have who did not grow up with a scarcity mindset, right? Who who come from, situations where the annual family vacation is a thing. Like what is that, right? We're gonna go where, and you've been doing this for how long, and how did your family afford to do that? And then there's a disconnect between the person who is used to going on family vacations every year. By the way, once you know, can you? I wonder if you can teach me what an annual family vacation is. You're like, oh yeah, that doesn't happen. Like our annual family vacation would maybe be going on the church the church trip, right? Which was like subsidized by our house of worship. Like I didn't get that.
That's so funny because when I grew up, there was no annual family vacation. I actually literally didn't know what you're talking about for a second. Then I realized, oh, my white friends go on annual family vacation. I didn't know it was called that thing. But no, I didn't have that growing up.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think about, my Chinese immigrant scarcity mindset made me save, right? Like the money script of money vigilance. Like every penny had to be saved, right? Like for actually, I still don't. I'd say so. 5 decades now, I've never ordered a soda or a drink at a restaurant, right? Because I gotta save for the future, and that's how I reacted to scarcity. And it seems like, in the logic of stupid poor folk article, what she's talking about is scarcity plays out as like immediately spend now, right? It's money status as the script.
Yeah, that's right. Because you don't know when you're gonna get that next major windfall. It was depressing, right, to read the article because in some communities it's true. Like your status increases when someone dies, and if someone dies and leaves you a hefty insurance policy, then that's your way to break the cycle of generational poverty, right? And so you want to show people that you are not like that. What does that show? The Jeffersons, right? Right. You made it to that big apartment in the sky, right? And I think that's what people who are used to not having a lot do. And I remember, and I'm not immune to this. My mom had given me a designer watch my junior year in high school for Christmas, and I remember being so enamored by it because I had never received designer anything. Like, and I just remember being in class, just marveling this watch and showing everybody that I had this amazing looking watch, right? But not really noticing that it's just, or understanding or accepting that it's just a watch, right? But I wanted people to, I wanted people in my immediate vicinity to see that, hey, that old Jessie is in the past, right? This is this new Jessie with this designer watch,
Oh
right? So we
yeah,
all go through.
no, I just remember when I was a kid in high school, and again, Chinese immigrant family, not a lot of money. When my parents got me a pair of Air Jordans my junior year, I wore those things so proudly when when they were cleaning and like new and spotless, and I wore those to the ground. But I just felt so proud. Like that was the first time, like, oh, I look like I have money.
Right, that's right. And so, that type of thinking, like the appearance of affluence, right, is the reason why poor people will spend their last on luxury goods, right? It's to shift the conversation to get them to think about something else, whether other than the fact that they might not be as wealthy or rich as they appear.
It's funny because one of the ideas in personal finance or in the fire movement is what you're not what you're not you're not seeking wealth. What you're actually seeking is the feeling of wealth, and like how do you feel wealthy. um and I think when you don't have a lot of money, consumption is the way that you feel wealthy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think when you do that, you're actually robbing yourself of your future, right? Right. And I would start, for me, I would stress the idea of like the future, like self to people of color, right? Especially, right? These are people who more than likely don't have the trust funds that other groups have, right? And if people are reminded of tomorrow every day and that the likelihood of tomorrow happening, right, is significant, right? Then I think the chances of them saving, investing, doing all of those things to prepare their future self, right, for a different life increases, right? And I think once I thought about that, my my the way I spent money, right, really changed, right? I was able to devote more to my savings accounts, right? I was able to have a better, more hefty emergency fund, right? And I was able to like to be okay with not having like that experience. I think I spent my money. I bought the soda, at the restaurant, right? I was able to do that. And I think with that, additionally, what helped me like think about my future self is knowing that I can't spend my existence feeling guilty, right, about saying no to family and friends when it comes to money. Because I truly believe the only person I'm responsible for is me, right? So if you're listening, the only person responsible for you is you. If your family or your friends ask for a loan, just remember your future self and use that to negotiate a no. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. However, I think families of color, especially Black families, tend to lean on the successful person too soon. And, that happened to me.
Yeah, I mean, just to offer a little grace, I mean, a part of it is this intersection of intergenerational wealth. Like every black or brown student I've ever had, they take this course and they talk about intergenerational wealth. They don't talk about wealth for themselves. They talk about passing wealth down. Now, in the lesson, it talks about how black families have 2% of the nation's wealth. And I was just reading a statistic that um, half of this country's $156 trillion is owned by baby boomers who will pass it forward,
Wow.
probably to their kids.
Hmm.
Baby boomers, half of that 156 trillion, and Gen X, who I'm in, is another 30%. And so, this is a social justice issue. What the baby boomers and Gen X do with the 80% of wealth that they're going to pass on, has huge racial effects.
That's right. And so for me, my spouse and I are doing our part to make sure that our offspring don't go through the same things that I went through, right? We're really thinking about their future, setting up instruments to make sure that when the time comes that they don't have to worry about the things that I worried about, right? We're teaching them what it means for them to be okay with what they have. Life is not about having all of your pleasures and your desires and your needs, your wants met, right?
You're
It's
marshmallow
about,
testing them.
yeah, a marshmallow testing them, right? And I hope it works, right? We'll see what will happen in the next couple of years, but I don't want them to feel like they have to save us, right? For example, when we get closer to retirement, and when we pass on, I don't want them to feel like they have to pass that hat in order to bury us, right? And I want them to be able to go have amazing, meaningful lives, knowing that we put these things in place for us to not have to repeat that generational trauma. I believe I'm a product of what my mom went through, and she's a product of what her grandparents went through, and they're products of what their great grandparents went through. And so I think I'm here to help break those bonds of the trauma you know, that they experienced.
Yeah, the arc of healing is long.
Mhm.
I think you're pointing to something super important, right? Like, if any individual person of color builds wealth, typically the wealth has to go to support older generations. And if you come from a family of privilege, the wealth goes down, to younger generations. And so, like, when you talk about like you got to take care of yourself first, I think it's super interesting because I think honestly, a lot of privileged folks, maybe white folks, think that they're doing that, but they're actually supported by generations of support before
Can
that.
you tell me more about that?
Well, like, oh, I got to take care of myself and I got to build my career. But like, if you have a legacy of like getting good education, having like family support when you get your first down payment, you think you're supporting yourself, but no, you've been supported by generations of help and love before that.
Right. And so I think what black and brown people who have historically, been left out of the wealth conversation have to do is figure out like, are you gonna be the one, right? To break that link in that chain, right? Of I'm gonna say financial unwellness for now. Are you gonna be the one that's going to remind people that there's a future self? And I think that's why I was drawn to the lesson. Because the more I live, right? No, only two alternatives. The closer I'm gonna get to having more time to think about the bad decisions I made. And I hope that, as I'm thinking about my life and how great it was, that I won't be doing things that have to sustain me, right? I want to retire. I want to be financially free. I want to not have to worry about money all of the time, right? And if I don't, squirrel a little bit of money away, my future self will be hating my past self, but not sacrificing, right, for my future.
All right. Well, we're coming up on our end here, and I've got two last questions for you. First of all, I just want to place what this course, Financial Freedom One, was in your financial learning. Like, where were you before? Where were you after? Because you sound super wise about all these things right now. What did financial freedom give you, and what did you learn independently?
Oh, right. Well, before the course, I was just scared. You have these behaviors and actions, and you think that time will fix it. No, time will only add interest to whatever you owe. And I was afraid to take a good, long, hard look at the numbers because it was just such an emotional experience, right? And I think what I learned through during the whole program is that money's a tool. It really is. It doesn't have feelings, right? And I can work to change my behavior such that money can be used as an amazing tool to do some worthwhile things. And so as a result of taking the course, I became less emotional about money. I'm better able to discuss finances with my loved ones, right? And it has empowered me to take better charge. This this wisdom comes from like being interested and not being afraid to talk about money. And I think that's what the financial freedom course, the School of Financial Freedom, has taught me. It taught me to be less afraid about having these taboo conversations.
Concretely, where did it get you? Like, did you set up, you know, more like investment accounts? Did you get out of debt? Like, what concretely?
Yeah, concretely, what it helped me do was put aside enough money to buy our first home, which we've done. It's also allowed me generational wealth. I'm in the middle of closing on the sale of our first home. We're in the middle of buying our second home right now. That should be wrapping up in the next couple of weeks or so. We're able to really set aside the money for an annual family vacation because we've been able to talk about it in a way that makes it real and concrete. So I think that's how we've been. Those are some of the takeaways from the lessons. How I've been able to immediately change my like spending behaviors.
Yeah, it occurs to me the course really helped you just become more aware of things. And then, you have the ability to change habits and behaviors and your ways of thinking. But I think the course allowed you just the awareness of what you really wanted to do and an awareness of what you were doing without knowing unconsciously.
Yeah, it was, we talked about the title of the author's article earlier. It was not, it was just ignorant. I, wasn't aware. I needed better awareness, and it just brought all of the things that were percolating in the back of my mind to the forefront.
Right. You weren't stupid. You were just ignorant.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's right.
I hope that your kids are going to hear this episode years from now when they get their first jobs. What do you want them to know as they step into their professional and personal careers and set off on their own?
That they have, I would say to my kids that they have all of the tools are out there. I have a good friend. You may know him. He told me that you can present the information to any and everybody, but it's up to them to do the work. And I want them to hear that if you do the work, then you have an opportunity to have a great life. And so, do all of the things, even the hard things, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes as you go along. But know that you have people who love and support you and who want you to succeed. And I say that because I think I was able to succeed because I had a lot of people rooting for me, especially the people I talked about in the village from where I'm from. So I want them to know that, mom and dad love you. Mom and dad have made mistakes, and mom and dad have, emerged from that better people. And you can also do it too. We're here to support you.
Thanks, Jesse. This was really a beautiful episode.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to Jesse for this episode. This is Douglas Soy. You are listening to the School of Financial Freedom podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the School of Financial Freedom podcast, where we ask, what does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit into that? We hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you live with an increasing sense of empowerment, integrity, and agency in the world. For more information, resources, and to re-listen to this or any past episodes, visit our website at schoolofinancialfreedom.com. There you can find out when the next cohort of Financial Freedom 1, the online course, is. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review, as it helps more people find us and join our community of people interested in the intersection of money and personal and spiritual growth. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of the School of Financial Freedom. You can also find me on Substack, where you can subscribe to my popular newsletter, Money and Meaning. I also love hearing from readers and listeners, so write me at www.douglassoy.com. I'm grateful that you listened, and I hope that this episode has given you hope and insight into taking control of your finances to live the life you want.